Hi, and welcome to Stories from the Elders. I'm your host, Melinda Nassif. In this episode, I'll be talking with Les Hubble, a well-respected veteran who has dedicated decades of his life to servicing our country, Australia. Now residing at RSL Care Life Village on the northern beaches of Sydney, New South Wales, Les is a big supporter to many retirees there and a great value to all. So let's jump straight in and get some intel about Les and his life. Hi Les.
Hi Linda.
How are you?
I'm fine.
Thanks for joining me for this conversation.
At the end of it, I'll tell you if it's my pleasure or not. No, thank you. Thinking it over, perhaps I have got something to say, but...
Maybe we can start with the introduction to yourself, how old you are, where you were born and brought up. You can start there and go from there.
Les Hubble, prefer to be called Les, but my name is Leslie. Born in 1937. For the first 9 years of my life was pretty up and down. Now, I never really knew my father. He joined the Air Force in 1941, and my only real recollection, I don't have a recollection of ever seeing him. And the only recollection I've got is that later on in years, my mother gave me a card that was an embossed birthday card in the shape of a 3, and it just had on the back, "Happy birthday, Dad." I recall that somewhere in that early period, he gave me a sailing boat. He didn't give it to me, it was given to me, and he'd made it because he was a carpenter, but he was away in the Air Force. Up until the time I was to go into about 4th, 5th and 6th years of school, I spent most of my time with my grandmother in Berrima, school holidays with my mother, wherever she was, with my younger brother and sister. And I remember them as good times all round, because in Berrima I lived with my grandmother. We lived in what is now known as Harper's Mansion, and is a prominent historical site. But in those days it was owned by the Catholic Church, and because she was a pensioner and what have you, she got it for peppercorn rent. And one of my aunts, the youngest daughter of my grandmother, lived there for a time with us, and we had fun. And it was a very small village in those days. Everyone sort of knew everybody, and it was quite a pleasant way. And in a strange sort of way, I was very happy when I went on school holidays up to my mother, and invariably it'd be a different place we'd be living in, but almost constantly she'd swap houses wherever she was with a friend who lived in Dole's Point, and we'd go there. So I never really lived in a house with my mother and brother and sister that was our own until I got back to Woy Woy in my 4th year of school.
Did you know much about your ancestry with your parents?
Not a great deal. I knew that my maternal grandfather was killed in a coal mine accident. I knew my paternal grandfather and grandmother very, very fleeting. I stayed with them, I think, for 2 days when I was a very, very young child. Now, because Mum never spoke about Dad or why he left or what have you, we, not consciously and with no sort of cohesive discussion, us 3 kids just accepted the fact that he came, he went, we came, he came, we came, he went.
Yeah.
That's it. My eldest son got a bit interested at one stage, found out that he actually met a guy with our name, Hubble, who was a boxer. It was quite obvious that he was one of our half-brothers, Papua New Guinea, and he said, "Would you like to correspond with him?" And I said, "No." I said, "If he wants to talk to me," I said, "I know what he wanted to talk, but I certainly would not. I wouldn't knock him back, but I said I wouldn't sort of encourage it," and he never did. So once it was that philosophy, you were dealt a bad deal, you got on with it, and you made the best of it. And as I say, I've never regretted not having a father, because I had so many other people that stepped into the role model, the great uncle particularly, but the other uncles as well, and the aunties. And so Yeah, Mum worked like a slave. She worked until she was 80. She ended up as running the big restaurant for Grace Brothers in Chatswood. She did all sorts of things. She was a travelling salesperson for a bloke that imported and sold women's clothes, worked in pubs and cafes and what have you. And I don't know what she worked at, but I wasn't there. And, we didn't miss out on anything.
And do you know why you moved around a fair bit?
Never really discussed. My suspicion is, because I've never spoken about it with anybody, my suspicion is, she moved around, she had jobs, she found it easier to cope with 2 kids rather than 3. The eldest one was probably the best one to get rid of at that stage. By the time we got back, I learned that, much later on, that my father supposedly, when he came out from the Air Force, went up to New Guinea and was going to work there and call the family up when he had the money. And that never happened. And we know for a fact that he married or partnered up with a Papua New Guinean lady and had children. That was it. Now, none of that ever worried me, and it didn't worry my brother and sister neither, because you don't miss what you haven't had. We had great role models in a great uncle, a couple of uncles, and a couple of aunts, and certainly my grandmother. That was it, and life was normal. When I got to Woy Woy, I realised that, being the eldest, and my mother was working, that I should pitch in, so I had a few jobs while I was still at school. First one, I used to carrying suitcases at the railway station in Woy Woy. We'd stand on the platform, not only me, but a whole tribe of kids, stand on the platform at Woy Woy, and the holiday makers coming up, we'd say, carry your bag, missus, or carry your bag, mister, and carry them over the steps and drop them at the bus or the taxi or whatever, and then they'd give you, 6pence, a shilling, 2 shillings if you were lucky. As soon as we got enough to buy a cream bun, we'd go across to the patisserie and buy a cream bun.
Yeah.
Charles's Bakery, I can recommend them. Then I got a job as a paper boy. Then I got a job with the local sanitary and garbage man. And I was too young and not strong enough to collect and empty the toilet cans. So my first job with him was cleaning them when they were emptied. He tried me on lifting garbage bins, but that was a bit much. And then I got a job with the ice carver. And that was very good, because he only let me carry the small ones. And it was quite interesting. And then he said to me one day, he said, look, this is a bit much for you, mate. He said, and you get better money. He said, I know the Rileys, and they'll give you a job as a bus conductor. And I said, okay. As a 15-year-old kid. And I said, yeah, okay. So, and that was good, because you met all the young girls who were coming up on holidays, and you knew exactly where they were living. Yeah. So, but that was good times. When I finished 3rd year of high school, I decided that I'd get out and join the Air Force as an apprentice. It didn't matter what sort of apprentice. I just thought, in those days, you get a good job, you'd be an apprentice, and that seemed to be the way to get it. My application was too late. I saw an advertisement in the paper for technicians in training with the PMG, as it was then, Postmaster General's Department. I got into that, did a very good first year training to be a technician at the school. The second year, you had to do 3 months in various jobs. The first job I had was subscribers installation. And this meant that people would put in an application to get a phone, and the technician that was my boss and was taking me around and mentoring me and showing me what to do, he would get dockets, and we would go and supposedly we'd go and put in the telephone or miniature exchanges in the business. This was running out of my depot as Hunter Street in Sydney. And that worked well, because after a while, he said to me, look, we've got 8 dockets. Every docket is 2 hours. He said, I'll give you 4. You go and do them. I'll follow you around and do mine as well. And we'll meet up at the coffee shop at 11 o'clock, have a cup of coffee, then we'll go home. So that's how I learned to be a bit imaginative about how you operated. That was fine. The second year, after that first 3 months, my job was at Alexandria in the Postmaster General's workshop. And that's where they did telephone repairs and various things with telephones, but it was also the paint shop and the mechanic shop for the postmaster and the telecom vehicle. So the postmasters were red and the telecoms were green. I had a job sitting at a desk or bench with 5 other people. There was a big pile of metal plates beside me, and I'd pull one down, put it in front of me, pull the lever on the device in front of me, and punch the sound holes in the base of the old Bakelite desk telephones. After 2 weeks of that, I said to the boss, I said, when am I going to get something else to do? He said, not. I said, what do you mean? He said, no, this is your training. And I said, well, I think I've learned all I can learn. He said, well, bad luck, mate. And I said, oh, yeah, okay. So on the Monday, instead of going to Alexandria, I went back to Hunter Street and walked into the senior technician's office and said, here I am. And he said, what are you doing here? And I said, I'm back to get my old job. Fortunately, the guy that was mentoring me when I was there, he said, oh, come on, Tom, you can fix something up. So they kept me there. And I got a job on my own to go down to Rushcutters Bay and put a telephone in, walked past the recruiting office for the Army, and I walked in and said, do you have telephone technicians in the Army? And he said, oh, yeah, sure, yeah, here, join up. I said, no, just give me some papers. Got the papers, and shortly after that, I convinced my mother that it was probably a good thing. She wasn't really convinced, but she...
How old were you then?
She signed the papers. I was just under my 17th birthday. The interesting thing was I filled the papers in, took them out, and for 2 weeks I was at Marrickville. I had to report there every day because I wasn't old enough to take the oath. So on my birthday, I just used to go there, and they gave me what we call giggle suits. It was a khaki uniform with a khaki hat, and you just walked around the place, and if anyone said, like, can you pick up those papers, or can you sweep that gutter or something, you'd do it. If not, you just sat there and sort of read books or something. And every night they would give me a travel warrant to go into Central Station, give it to the Rail Transport Officer, Army, and he'd give you a free ticket to Woy and back. On the 17th birthday, I went in and they said, congratulations, took the oath, and I went up and said, well, can I have my rail warrant? And he said, oh, no, you're in the Army now, mate. You can go home, but of course we don't want to see you again for another couple of weeks until we get you down to the next recruit training. He said, but we'll give you a leave pass, but we're not going to pay you fare. So I got to the recruit training battalion, and that was at Wagga. That was very good. They said, what do you want to do? And I said, I want to go to the Corps of Signals. And of course, that's where the telephone technicians are. And they said, right. So I was sent to the School of Signals. And I got there, and my first interview with the second in command, he said, what do you want to be, lad? And I said, telephone technician. And he laughed. He said, oh, we haven't had telephone technicians for 15 years. And I said, oh, okay. And he said, put you on a radio mechanics course. And I said, fine. One didn't start for a month, so I spent a month in the officers' mess as a barman. Went on to the course, and 2 weeks later it became quite obvious to them and to me that I'd never be a radio mechanic while I wore pants. I was hanging around in the officers' mess again as a barman, and the commanding officer called me in one day and he said, we're sending you off to the cadet school, the officer cadet school, Portsea. And I said, oh, thanks very much. So off I went. Portsea was on the Morning Peninsula, at the end of the peninsula. It was the old quarantine station, from the early settlement days. My intake was the first of 12 months. It started in 1951. It was a 6 months course, and it was designed to quickly get young officers at second lieutenant rank when they graduated, so that there'd be a good pool of officers for the Vietnam War or anything that came up, because things were starting to look a bit hairy. Then they decided that they'd make it 12 months. The interesting thing about this is that if you graduated from the officer cadet school, your career was very, very strictly limited. If you passed all of the examinations and you were promoted to major, you would be discharged when you turned 49. Everyone said, yeah, that's fine. Okay. You had that long in the Army. If you didn't get promoted, you didn't get. At the end of your time, you'd have your retirement benefit fund, which was basically superannuation, or pension, they called it in those days. And if you go off and do things. So that was fine. It was all clear. What it also meant was that you could be yourself. You didn't have to be a yes man, because it didn't matter. They couldn't do much to you if you were right. And you'd be gone by 49 anyway. My first stint out of the cadet schools, I went back to the School of Signals for a couple of weeks or 3 or 4 weeks before I was posted to the National Service Training Battalion at Holsworthy in Sydney. When I was leaving, the CEO of the school said to me, "I'll give you some advice." And I said, "Thank you, sir." He said, "You got a dog, you don't bark." And I said, "Oh, thank you." What's he mean? I didn't have a clue.
Yeah.
When I arrived at the Recruit Training Battalion, I quickly learned what it meant. At National Service, you had an intake would come in. This was in the days of the conscription for 3 months. You had a staff, usually a sergeant and a couple of corporals. I was unfortunate in one sense that I only had one corporal and a lance corporal. I quickly learned that after 3 months, you lost all of the people that you were responsible for and responsible to train. So any mistakes you made left you.
Interesting.
And the other thing I learned is that I had a very good dog. I had 2 good dogs, actually. And I learned very quickly after I tried to do something one day and the corporal said to me, "Listen, boss, that's my job. Keep your hands off it and don't do it," right? And that's when I learned, if you got a dog, you don't bark. So I had two years there. Then I was posted back to the school as a officer in charge of operating trades. And I had some very good dogs there, all warrant officers and sergeants, skilled, over-skilled in some cases. They were so good in their trades as instructors. They'd all been to Japan with the British Commonwealth Occupation Force after the war. They were all first class. And just to give you here, as a young bloke of 19, I said to my sergeant, who was a very talented Morse key operator, I said, when you've got a spare period, can you give me a run, get me up to speed on being a Morsey? And he said, "Yeah, sure." At the end of it, I said, "How do I go?" And he said, "Boss, you'll never be a bloody Morse operator while your bum points to the ground." He said, "Go and see Joyce. Go and see Joyce. You might be better on the keyboards on the teletypes." So I saw Warrant Officer Joyce Curran, and she said, "Yeah, boss, yeah, Wednesday, you could do it." So after the first lesson, I said to her, "How'd I go, Joyce?" She said, "Boss, weren't you on the motorcycle demonstration team when you were a signalman?" And I said, "Yeah." She said, "Why don't you go back to riding motorbikes?" However, they taught me more in the few years a couple of years I was there, and I'd learned up till that stage. Because if ever I started to do something wrong, it was, "No, boss, don't do that." And then they just looked after you. So that was brilliant. And that taught me another thing, that you've got to respect the fact that your biggest mentors are not the people necessarily that are senior to you. They're the people that are junior to you. And if you treat them right, do what you're supposed to do with them, that's look after their welfare, protect them, then they'll certainly do the same for you. During the time I was there, I got married in 1960. My wife virtually put on a uniform. She didn't really, but she virtually put on a uniform and decided that she was going to be, a proper army wife as I saw it and she saw it. We planned our life around the fact that by 49 we'd be out. I'd be looking for another career or another job, and that was what we were going to do. So we had a very successful time there. After that, I was posted to the Special Air Service Company in Western Australia. Our first child was born while we were it's at the School of Signals, and the second one was born while we were there. And I'd been promoted to lieutenant. To get from second lieutenant to lieutenant, you had to qualify at 4 subjects in Victorian leaving standard, 6th form Victoria. And as I left in year 3 in New South Wales, I only had an intermediate certificate. And that ensured then that I'd get promoted to lieutenant, and away we went. We came back from there. I was posted to the 3rd Division Signal Regiment in Albert Park, Victoria, Melbourne. That was a citizen military force, and I was the adjutant. And the regular army component there was, the officer component was a major, who was the second in command, and I as the adjutant. And I was there for about 3 months. Second in command said to me, "I've just heard from the Director of Signals you're being posted down to the Officer Cadet School." And I said, "What?" When the CMF CO came in, and he got the message. He said, no, that's not going to happen. He picked up the phone, rang the director, and after a heated argument, he said, I'm sorry, I've lost the argument, you've got to go. So I then went down to be interviewed by the commandant of the Officer Cadet School, and he said, why don't you want to come here? And I said, well, first of all, I said, I've got a very nice married quarter. I'm the adjutant of a CMF unit, and that's one of the things that you have to do a full posting as an adjutant somewhere, and a CMF unit is as good as anyone, anywhere. If I come here, I won't get another chance to do an adjutant's job. He said, I can tell you that as far as being an adjutant goes, that is now ticked off. You're qualified to go to whatever it is. And I said, fine. And he said, and I've got a married quarter for you. He said, so you've got no reason, have you? And I said, no. So we went there for 2 years, and that was an excellent job. All the kids called him Uncle Colonel. All the instructors loved him. He was great. I'd been promoted to captain, obviously, there. One of my jobs was, apart from being the signals instructor, I was the Couth and Culture officer. That was to teach the cadets the customs of the service, how you conduct yourself as an officer in general, and all the rest of it.
Great.
After that, I was posted to Darwin as the captain regimental duties, which was the regular army officer in the 125th Signal Squadron, which was a CMF squadron. That was a very interesting thing. Once again, I was sent there because the guy that had preceded me had not done what he was told to do. One of the things he was told to do was to get rid of a whole bunch of stores, signal stores, that had been in this big hut since the end of the Second World War. And nobody had been able to do it, apparently. And I was told that if I did a good job up there, I could write my own ticket. They'd send me wherever I wanted to go. So I said, fine. And that's when I learnt that if you set up a good relationship with the public service people in the army, say with the people that controlled the finances, you could get things done. So I said to our financial officer, I said, how do I do this? He said, simple. He said, we put them up for sale. And he said, and those that don't sell, we put them in the army workboat, take them out into Darwin Harbour and chuck them overboard and ride them off. So I said, fine. I was also the part-time commander of the reconnaissance platoon. This was an ad hoc platoon, and our job was to scout around the territory so that we would know the layout, and this was in the time of confrontation with Indonesia, so that if a battalion was ever posted to take some offensive action against any Indonesian action against us, we would have people that could go with them that knew the country and could guide them where to go, and so they know what was on about. We did that, and on one occasion I sent my troops home. We were down at about the middle of the territory, pretty close to the coast. We called into this station that had a bar, and we decided that we'd call in there and say good day. And there was an old fella sitting in the corner drinking his beer, and he said, you blokes come down to catch the Indons, have you? And I said, no, what Indons? He said, the ones that are down on the beach there. And I said, no. I said, could you show us where they are? Oh, he said, I couldn't do that, mate. I said, well, look, I said, if we get a couple of bottles of beer, make you comfortable in the back of the Land Rover, could you show us? Oh, yeah. So we drive on down, and we get to going up the last hill, and he said, you can see him from here. Well, we got out of the Land Rover. I had my warrant officer with me. We got out of the Land Rover, and sure enough, here are all these tents and humpies and what have you. Big lines of meat hanging on lines, like washing lines. So I raced back and said to the duty officer, because it was night, and I got back, I said, I've got to go and see the commander. I've got to see the commander. He said, no. He said, we got your message. The commander will see you in his office at 8 o'clock tomorrow morning. I said, no, it's more important. He said, no, that's what you've got to do. So I went to the commander's office at 8 o'clock, and he said, we're going to go in to see the administrator. So I went in there, and that's where I was let into the secret that everyone knew that these Indonesians, which had been brought in by an Indonesian boat, military boat, and dropped off to collect food, buffalo, and dry it and send it back because they were starving.
Really?
Yeah. And the other funny thing we got an exercise call that we were to go to the Tiwi Islands and Bathurst Island, because the padre at Bathurst Island, the priest, had reported an Indonesian submarine. So and they said, now this is not a practice. This is a fair dinkum operational thing. So we were given ammunition for our rifles, five rounds of ammunition each, and we get up there, and I get off at the wharf, and I said to the padre, I said, "Where's this submarine?" He said, "Out there." And he pointed, and there was a little black speck on the horizon. So I said, "Oh, okay." So I looked at the warrant officer who'd driving the workboat, and I said, "Head off from here, get away from where everyone can see us, and just, in that general direction." And when we got there, I said, "Righto, pull out your rifles at that black speck, fire 2 rounds each." We fired that, and I put an entry in the log that we tried to intercept an Indonesian submarine, but he was too big for us. So I don't know if that went into the records. After that, I was posted back to headquarters in Eastern Command, and I was promoted major, and there was a staff officer there, signals. 2 years later, I was sent to the Australian Staff College. That was unusual because I was a very junior major, and I was an officers cadet school graduate. But I went and I got a C pass, nothing. It was a very good year. And then we found out that this business about retiring at 49 had now been changed. You could just keep going if you wanted to. So after that, I was posted as the second in command of the 1st Signal Regiment, which was a regular signal regiment at Ingleburn. And I got there and called into the CO and said, "I'm here, but I'm on leave until the middle of February. But if there's an exercise or something on, I can put my leave off." And he said, "Oh, you better go and see the Chief Signals Officer in at Victoria Barracks." And I said, "Okay." So I went in to see him, and he said, "Yeah, we want you to start tomorrow." He said, "The commanding officer has been called to Canberra, and his replacement will not be available till March because he's away on a course in the United Kingdom." He said, "So you'll be administering command." And I said, "Okay." He said, "Now, do you know," and he named an officer, and I said, "Yes." He said, "Well, he's one of your squadron commanders." He said, "You know he is senior to you?" And I said, "Yes." He said, how would you treat it if he has some problem?" I said, "Well, if he and I can't work out the problem," I said, "I'll sack him." And he said, "You can't do that." And I said, "Look, you've appointed me to be the commanding officer." And he said, "Yes." I said, "So I'm the commanding officer and I'll sack him." And he said, "Well, how will you do that?" I said, "Simple. I'll just say to him, 'Hey, listen, boy, pack up your bags, go and see the Chief Signals Officer in Paddington, he'll give you a new job." And he said, "Oh, that'd work, I suppose." So anyway, that was right. And so I had three good months, threatened with the 2 court-martials by the administrator in Ingleburn. There was a area commander, a brigadier, and he ran the administration of all units. And my immediate command headquarters was the divisional headquarters that was situated in the city, Sydney. And I was operationally responsible to the general in there, and I was administratively responsible to the brigade there in Ingleburn. Once again, this is a little bit of detail, but it gives you why I'm what I am. We got an instruction that because our vehicles were in poor condition, because they weren't being used enough, we were to run them around the countryside for 2 hours every day. And I said to my transport sergeant, I said, "We're not going to do that." And he said, "Well, boss, we've got to." I said, "No." I said, "How many of our people come by train to the Eastern Suburbs railway station and catch a bus to get here?" And he said, "Oh, most of them that live out." I said, "Right, we're going to run a shuttle transport service to get them to and from work, and that'll fix the problem." And he said, "Yeah, that's a good idea." So we did, and I was threatened with disobeying a lawful command, and the general got onto the brigadier, and that didn't happen. The next thing that he got onto me for was we had a regular signals regiment, 5 signal regiment at Dundas, and they were just opening their men's club. We had a men's club, and the commanding officer there said to me, "Would you like to come out and represent your regiment at the opening of our club?" And I said, "No, I'll send the president of our club, the corporal." He said, "Oh, that's an even better idea." And I said, "Yeah, that's what I thought." So I said to the corporal, I said, do this. I said, get your wife and the staff car will pick you up at your home at this time and take you out. So 2 days after that, I called up to the brigadier and he said, who authorised the illegal use of your motor car? And I said, nobody. He said, what do you mean? I said, A, there was no illegal use. I authorised a legal use. He said, it's your car. You're the only one that can use it. I said, it is my car. I can do what I like with it. I'm a commanding officer. And if I want to use my car to transport one of my staff and his wife to a function that is an official function, I'm going to do it. So once again, the general jumped in and saved me. So from there, I'd had a bit of a problem with my legs, and the medical bloke there said, you've got varicose veins. When you get to Sydney, get them stripped. Went to see this specialist, and he said, you haven't got varicose veins. I don't know what it is, but it's not varicose veins. And then my doctor, our regimental doctor, was, we discuss it every so often. He'd make all sorts of weird things that I shouldn't do. Don't drink alcohol for a while, don't have sex. In July, I got a call and said that in November, I was to go to Enoggera in Queensland, raise a signal squadron and take it to Vietnam the year after. So I said to the GP, I said, well, we've got to get this done. So he went to, he said, I'll send you to this bloke in Macquarie Street. I went in there and he took one look at my legs. He said, you've got Berger's disease. When can you go to hospital? And I said, this is July. I've got this, I've got that. I said, October. He said, no, I meant tonight or tomorrow. He said, you've lost all of the artery in your right leg below the knee. If you don't get it, he said, we'll chop the leg off and we'll just keep going. So we went in there and got that. And that, of course, paid to go in there up to Enoggera. October, the boss came in and said, we've got to go for a medical board. And I said, okay. And he said, you've got to walk down to the hospital. That was about half a mile. I could get there, and a medical board was usually half a dozen people, doctors and a few others. And the sergeant said to me, medical board up on the last room on the left. So I walked in. Here's an elderly gentleman, obviously a doctor because he's in the medical corps uniform. And he said to me, g'day son, did you walk down here? And I said, yeah. He said, how do you feel? I said, good. He said, no problems. And I said, no problems. He said, okay. No, we won't. We'll get rid of that homely. We'll make a communication zone everywhere. So I said, fine. The medical classification was if you're home only meant you had a medical condition that meant that you couldn't leave Australia. Combat zone everywhere meant that you could go anywhere where there was major hospitals close by you could get attention. I went back and said to the boss, I don't know what the hell's going on. So he rang the director, and about 10 minutes later he came and he said, well, the good news, he said, you want the good news or the bad news? And I said, well, give us the bad news first. He said, well, the bad news is you're going. And I thought, And he said, yeah, the good news is that you're going to Singapore in November with your wife and family, and you're going to be the 2IC of the Anzac Signal Regiment. So I said, yeah, I do. So that was very good, and we learnt a lot there. This is where my wife really shone as my wife, because we were the commanding officer of the regiment who was Australian. And said to me, I do all the operations, you do all the administration, and if you have any problems, just come to me and I'll back you up. He said, but if you don't have any problems, we'll just meet every Friday for morning tea and tell each other what we've been up to. And we had Army, Navy, Air Force, male and female of the three countries. We had locally enlisted civilians, and we had civilian signals type people for the security signalling thing from the three countries as well, male and female. And we were totally responsible for them. That led to another problem of mine, because the director of signals came up and he said to me, you're not flying the signals flag? I said, yes, I am. I'm flying the 9 Anzac Signals Regiment flag. And he said, you should have the normal signals flag with a 9 in the corner. And I said, well, we've not. We've got the signals flag, but we don't have anything else on it except the tri-service badge in the middle of it. And he said, well, that's not good enough. I said, well, the force commander thinks it's good, so if you've got a problem, sir, go and talk to him. And then the next thing he brought up with me was, how many people go to, he said, I see that the doctor goes to the squadron out at Kranji. And I said, yes. For sick parade. And I said, yes. He said, he said, he's here, how many do you have on sick parade? And I said, probably about, from the headquarters here, we probably have about 5 or 6, maybe 10 with a bad day. I said, that includes, everyone on the headquarters. And he said, okay. So the next morning, the CEO calls me and he said, the director called me from the airport last night. And he said, and how many's out at Cranji? And I said, I think they average around about 25, 30 a day. And he said, So the next morning the CEO rang me and said, or called me in, and he said, the director rang me from the airport. He said he was he had 1 or 2 beers too many, I think. He said that I had to watch you carefully because you were a liar. You weren't really on top of everything. He said, what was he talking about? I said, I don't know. I said, the only thing he got onto me about was the flag. And he said, I thought I explained that to him. And I said, yeah, well, the only other thing, he asked me why the doctor went to Cranji, and I said, I don't know. So he said, well, he said you were a liar. So I rang the guy that owned, the commander of the squadron at Cranji. I said, Keith, did the director ask you how many you had on sick parade? And he said, yeah. I said, what did you tell him? He said, 6. And I said, you didn't tell him about the wives and kids? He said, no, he asked me how many my squadron had. And I said, okay. So I wrote a letter to the director explaining that that was a misunderstanding, but I never got an answer, and that was it. So after that, we came back, and I was posted to headquarters, Army headquarters in Canberra, and it was the worst job of my career. I was the staff officer in the Army reorganisation planning staff, and to cut a long story short, there was 4 majors sitting in a room, and we didn't do anything. The brigadier that was running it was an autocrat. He didn't let anybody do anything unless he couldn't do it himself. So I just put that out of my head and decided that I'd apply for a job. Well, first of all, I applied to do I said to my immediate boss if I could do a part-time course at the Canberra Advanced College of Education as a librarian. He said, no. He said, the brigadier won't let you off for anything. And that's when I applied for a job to be the general manager of the Australian Netball Association. I was told I was on the short list and I missed the job, and I rang him up and said, can you tell me why I didn't get it? He said, you got everything we needed, but we just felt you did not really want to leave the army and come to this job. So that was that. Partway through the first year of that job, the brigadier called me and said, you've been posted. He said, first of all, he called me and he said, you'll be here for another couple of years because all the others are going and you're the continuity man. And I thought, well, that's good. That was in 1973. So a bit later, in that couple of weeks, he called me and said, you've been posted. And I said, oh, okay. I was standing there like an idiot. And I said, could you tell me where to and when? He said, I'll go and have a talk to your mate, Bradbury. Off you go. So I walked out and I couldn't work this out. The only Bradbury I knew was a guy who was a general, and he was the chief of personnel in the Army. And my only connection with him was he was the Colonel Operations in Sydney when I was at Headquarters Eastern Command. And I was a young major there before I went to the Staff College. And, he was hardly a friend, not a mate. We used to say g'day and hello and what have you, and we were very social and civil. But so I rang his staff officer and said, can I come over and see that? Yeah, come over now, he's here. So I walked in and he said, oh, g'day, young fella, how you going? I said, fine. He said, what do you know about Ops Branch? I said, I don't know anything about Ops Branch, sir. And he said, neither do I. He said, in 2 weeks' time, I'm going to be the Chief of Operations and you're going to be my staff officer, so get yourself over to Ops Branch and learn all about it. So that was fine. That got me out of the job that I was in. And what I didn't know at that stage, that while I was in that job, I went for a P&S for promotion and selection committee. They said to me, how are you? And I said, I'm fine. Your medical thing, fine. Yeah, thank you very much. The job, I said, well, I don't like the job I'm in. I said, and it doesn't look as though I'm going to get much relief from that because I'm the continuity man. And at this stage of the game, I'm just weighing up my options. So they said, all right. And he was the head of that selection committee was the general I worked for in Sydney. And Bradbury was on that committee as well. So when he got over there into Ops Branch, I said to him, what correspondence am I not allowed to read? And he said, well, you've got top security clearance. He said, if it's pink and got a nice smell about it, he said, don't open it. So open everything else. So that was fine. It was a very good job, and we settled in. And he came in one day and he said to me, what's the matter with you? And I said, what do you mean, what's the matter with me? He said, for the last week, he said, you've been very different. And I said, what do you mean? He said, well, you're not being yourself. I said, boss, look, I don't think that I've been any different. Can you enlighten me a bit more? He said, you read the P&S notes when they came in, didn't you? And I said, yes. He said, well, that's it, isn't it? He said, refresh my mind. What did it say? And I said, it said that I was not fit for promotion yet. And he said, and what was the reason that decision was made? I said, because the Director of Signal said that he would not have me as a Lieutenant Colonel in the Signal Corps. He said, correct. He said, now, isn't that funny? He said, that's why you're here. Get on with the job. And I was there for a while, and then I got promoted to Lieutenant Colonel and made the Staff Officer 1 of the whole of the Army Office Operations Branch. He was still the General. He came into me one day and he said, you going to the Signal Corps dinner? And I said, no. He said, well, I am. I said, oh, good luck, you said. And he said, and you are too. And I said, no, I'm not. I told him I'm not. He said, you are. You're coming with me. I want you to accompany me. I said, okay, fine. He said, I'll send the car to get you. We arrived at the dinner, and there was a new director at this stage. But the general was sort of saying to me, oh, come over here. Come over here. He's edging me around. And we finally end up, he's on one side of me, and Colonel Clark, who was the director of signals, had said that he would never have me in his signal corps, was on the other side. So it was a bit tense. The director got up, the serving director then got up and said, I'd like to welcome General Bradbury, and I'd like to welcome past directors, Colonel Clark and Colonel Evans, and he said, and I'd also like to welcome the next director of the Royal New Zealand Signal Corps, Lieutenant Colonel Hubble.
Did you know this?
No.
Yeah.
And the General looked over my head at Clark and said, now, isn't that a thing? So then, of course, I went and became the Director of the Royal New Zealand Signal Corps for 2 years. And that was a wonderful job. It would have been an honour to be the Director of the Australian Signal Corps, but it was a bigger honour to be the Director of the New Zealand Signal Corps, as an Australian officer. And that was very good. Came home from there. And went to Field Force Command as Staff Officer Grade 1 at Sydney. And while I was there, in December 79, I went to southern Rhodesia with the Australian contingent of the monitoring force as a Lieutenant Colonel Commissioner with the Zimbabwe African National Liberation Army in Operation Area Hurricane. There we were for about 3 or 4 months. Actually, we left on Christmas Eve and came home in March. I had a couple of run-ins there. The commander of the force was a British general, and he put out an edict that there was to be no ceremony when he visited troops. And I had 5 assembly areas, and each assembly area would put out collection points, and the guerrillas would, as part of the ceasefire, would come into the collection point, supposedly give up their weapons, and then come into the assembly area, and the assembly area would look after them until it came time to disband the monitoring force and let the election go ahead. And the General Staff rang me up one day and said, the General will be visiting Assembly Area Alpha, and he wants you to meet him at the airport at Jura at 6 o'clock in the morning and to accompany him. And I said, fine. And I rang my captain who was in charge of the thing and told him, and I said, get the place in order, ready for him. And I said, don't go to any special thing. And he rang me back about an hour later and said, look, sir, my young second lieutenant wants to put on a little guard for the general. And I said, we're not supposed to do that. And he said, well, you know, the situation, don't you? And I said, yep. I said, oh, do it. I said, but I won't be there. You know, you have a good story for the general. And we cooked up what we were going to tell the general. Anyway, I'm just about finished and dressed to go to breakfast. And the phone rings. Where are you? I'm in my office. And he said, why aren't you here? And I said, because somebody rang me last night and told me that there was no space on the helicopter and I would not be required. And he said, that's effing, because every sentence was littered with effing again. Get yourself here. So I did. And we got on the helicopter and we went out, and he's very amicable. You know, he said, blaming his staff, not me, for not being there. And as we were circling around, he looked down and he said, what's that down there? And I said, what's what? He said, those troops lined up. I said, oh, that's just a little guard. Say, welcome, sir. He said, I said no ceremonial. I said, well, I'm sorry. I said, but the young second lieutenant who is in charge of that is a member of the Royal Scots Guard. You are the Colonel Commandant of the Royal Scots Guard, and he wanted and insisted that he be able to pay a compliment to his Colonel-in-Chief. I said, now you have 3 effing options. You can stay on here and I'll get off and say that you were called back urgently. I said, or you can get off here and effing ignore, or you can get off here, inspect the guard and sack me. I said, or you can sack me, whatever you do. I said, but that's it. So he said, oh, well, you better land. So he landed and we did the thing and that was all right. And the next thing I had done wrong, or that I did wrong, was that our Army Chief of Operations, a very dogmatic general who I'd served under at one stage for a little while in Sydney, came up to visit, and he said, I don't want any, no ceremony, no socialise, no stuff. Right? So he came out and I said to him, there's a cocktail party tonight in your honour, sir. And he said, I said, no. I said, the governor came here. We were billeted in and had our office in a motel in Bindura. And I said, the governor came here and his staff wanted to have a cocktail party in the lounge and they would not let him. I said, because they couldn't wear and didn't wear coats and ties. I said, that's been his policy for the 9 years of the war and he wasn't going to break it. And he said to me, oh, your chief is coming up. And I said, yes. He said, we'll put on a cocktail party. And I said, no, he doesn't want a cocktail party. He doesn't want anything. I said, we'll just have a drink in the bar. And he said, no, I'm putting on a cocktail party. So I said, okay. So I said, so that's it. I said, now, all that tells you is what he thinks of our army. So I said, you've got 2 effing options. You can hop in your helicopter and go back to Harare and I'll say you were sick or you something else. I said, well, you can go. I said, but you'll be setting the precedent. I said, because this is the first time in 9 years that anybody without a tie or without a coat has been allowed into the lounge. And he said, oh, well, I better go, I suppose. Now, the funny part about that, of course, is that about all that is that the British general asked the Australian government if me and my crew could stay for 3 weeks after the force was disbanded, and my job was to be a special liaison between him and a brigadier that I'd had a run-in with during the course of the employment, and that was fine. And when I got home, I was nominated and given a member of the Order of Australia by the Australian General. After I got back, I was Staff Officer Training, Headquarters Training Command, Staff Officer Personnel and Logistics, then promoted to Colonel, went as Colonel Development to Headquarters Field Force Command, and served there until 49th birthday in 1986 when I retired. And that was basically the life story. Now, through all that, my wife was there, virtually wearing a uniform, making sure that we did what we had to do, and that was to be responsible for the welfare of everyone who was under my command. Didn't matter whether that was 5 or 500. And every time I did something wrong or this sort of thing, she agreed with me wholeheartedly, and she was quite happy that if I got sacked, that was fine, we'd go and do something else.
Support you, yeah. And that's a great thing to have, isn't it? To have that regardless of whatever happens, you'll get through it together.
So and after that we retired to the Gold Coast, and I had a brief stint in real estate. Then I joined a wholesale wine and food distributor on the basis that if he wanted me to work, I would. If I didn't want to work, I wouldn't. And that was fine. And then we ceased all and went on what we planned to do, was travel and have no responsibilities for anyone other than ourselves. Came down here, Anzac Village, and we were going to do the same thing. But they elected me the residents representative, Ardenell's village, and so we had to put on the uniform again and get into it. And Anne, by this time, had multiple chemical sensitivity had really ramped up, and we couldn't go travelling anyway, so we just got back to doing what we did before, put on the uniform. And I'm back doing that now, but it's not to the same extent that when she was here and making all the bits and pieces. And yeah, so that's basically it, I think.
It's truly incredible to hear all of this, Les. Looking back now, is there anything you can share in terms of what it all has taught you?
You do what you do. You only do what you want to do and like to do, and you do it well. You don't be a yes man, and you don't give up your principles for a promotion or for an award or for an applause or something. You do what you know is right to do. Do it as best you can, and that's it. I learned very early in the piece that there were basically three types of people in the army, or that's in the service generally. Those that were mad keen to become a general at any cost.
Yeah.
And there were those that couldn't care less. But some of the ones that couldn't care less had a wife whose sole aim in life was to make sure that her husband became a general. And you had some wives like mine who got in and virtually put on a uniform and did what you did the way you did it. And then you had the other wife that said, well, we're in the army and someday we'll get out and we'll be able to do what I want to do. I've never regretted anything from the day I was born till now.
It's great that you voiced what you thought was the right thing to do and not just led a different way.
Oh, yeah.
Many people can be afraid of speaking out their truth.
Yeah, and I can understand that. I don't denigrate people that do it. It's, in my opinion, if you want to have a good life, and if you are right and you know you're right, then do it. And if somebody who's got authority over you says, well, you're going to pay for doing that because that's not what I wanted you to do, then too bad.
And so, just looking back at your life, would you have done anything different?
No, not consciously.
Really?
As I say, if I could well have been, easily rerouted to something if, for instance, if I had got canned from the army. But the only reason I went into the Air Force was because in those days you had to do something, and it was pretty easy to get a job. And I thought, well, the Air Force, they look after you. You're an apprentice, and when you get out of the Air Force, then you've got a qualification. That didn't work because I had my application too late. And then same with the PMG, you'd have a qualification. Another incident that sort of taught me to be something the way I am. While we were at that school, remember, we were 15, 16-year-old kids, but we ranged up to 18, 19. The boss came in one day and he said, now all you blokes have got to join the union. And he said, what? And he said, yeah. And he said, but we're going to pay union dues. And he said, yeah. Sure. And a very smart 19-year-old said, hang on. So the boss went out and he said, listen, we all joined the union. He said, we won't be in it for more than a week. And we said, what? He said, yeah, we go to the first meeting, when they propose something, we vote against it, all of us. He said, now they never get more than 10 or 15 people to their meetings. We've got 25, we'll always win. So we did. We went to the first meeting, and the first thing on the agenda was to increase the honorarium of the union officers. We all voted against it. So the next Monday, the boss came in and said, look, we've been talking to the chiefs up in Canberra, and there's really, we're really not permitted to have technicians in training in the union. So along the way you pick up all these little things.
Little ways, yeah.
Along the way, if you keep your mind open, all sorts of ideas presented to you in a practical way, and you can either accept them because they're good, or dismiss them because they're not good, or that they're not applicable to you. If you don't try and train yourself school yourself to look for clues about how you should be acting and reacting to circumstances. You miss a lot.
That's actually some really good advice. And it's quite simple. You've really simplified it. We don't need to make things complicated for ourselves, If it's a good thing, it's good.
It's a good thing to do.
So on that, from what you've learnt, and you've done so much and seen a lot with this world, and is there anything from your experience that the younger generation you think is valuable to use in this world we live in now?
Yeah, it's very complex because there are so many things that are going on. I think I would find it difficult to be a young person now rather than it was when I was young. And talking to my peers here, the kids have got to balance up their own, work out their own ethics, and they're bombarded continually with YouTubes and Instagrams and what have you. They've really got little time to sit down and try and work out what is actually the right thing. And I think if I was thrown into this now as a youngster, I'd be totally confused. I like the idea that if you wanted to know something, you went down to the library. You got your news over the radio, and you got your weekly news at the newsreel at the cinema.
At the cinema.
And it was at least a week late, but at least you knew that what you were getting was genuine. Now 50% of the stuff that comes into my iPad is rubbish, and it must be very difficult for them to sort of find their way through this maze of information that is coming around. So I really think I'd struggle if I was a kid.
Yeah, it's definitely hard. But I think with this talk we've had here now, you've given some good advice.
I wish some of my friends here would take it.
Yeah, I know, right? Your friends never listen to you. So what do you think the purpose of life is? How did you get to that conclusion?
Oh, I can only say my purpose in life, because I don't believe that there is a universal purpose in life. If I was a Christian, I would have a Christian purpose in life. If I was a Muslim, I'd have a Muslim purpose in life.
Yeah.
As an atheist, I don't think there is an atheist purpose in life. I think the best way I can sum it up very, very quickly, and people say to me, you were baptised and confirmed into the Christian faith, and I say yes. And they say, well, you've given that away. And I said yes. And they say, well, what's your purpose in life, sort of thing, just like the question you asked me. And I said, well, look, my understanding is that every major faith, Christian, Buddhist, Muslim, every sect, Catholic, Anglican, Presbyterian, Methodist, whatever, the one thing that 99% of them always have as one of their central tenets is do unto others as you'd have them do unto you. That's my tenet in life, is if I'm doing that, then I'm doing what every person in every religion and every religious sect are being told to do. And I try to do that. I don't always succeed.
Yeah, no.
But I certainly try. So that would be my particular personal purpose in life. I've got no ambition to be something great. I've got no ambition to be rich. Ambition to be a celebrity. And the other one is, of course, is that be happy. And I know that's hard to do, but I think if you strive, you can see happiness at the end of everything. If you really want to, and if you really strive to do it. Of course, there are some things that there's no happiness at the end of, but most.
Make the most of what you can and what you've
got.
got.
And when you look around, you see people who've got nothing and they're happy. You see people who've got everything and they're unhappy.
Exactly.
Or you see people with everything and they're very happy. You see people with nothing and they're very unhappy. But if you
depends on the individual.
Try and get through the middle course, And once again, it all runs down to your personality, you personally. And my good fortune was that I married a girl that had the same thing. In 60 years of marriage, we never had an argument. We had 2 debates. I ceded one and she ceded one. So it was even.
Evened out. Oh, that's beautiful. 60 years. That's great. Yeah. And maybe you've already answered this, but let's just throw it out there. What do you hope more of for the future?
Well, I would hope that the politicians were able to get this sort of idea that they first had in this Australian government, federal cabinet, or the Australian cabinet, or whatever they call it, where they were looking not to further their own personal position, nor the position of their own political creed, but rather the joint proper way to handle the problem without sniping at somebody for something that's irrelevant to the problem, but you can bring it in as a snipe. So that would be one of the things. I know that's never going to happen because you're never going to get a democracy around the world.
Is there any other words you'd like to share?
No, I don't think so.
You've said what
I
you had to say.
hope I haven't bored everyone with the sort of almost detail of my life.
Yeah, well, no, but it's interesting.
There's a lot more detail, but it's not probably some of it not fit for publication.
Well, thanks so much, Les. Really, thank you so much. It's really been amazing to hear your story.
Yeah, nice to meet up with you. Yeah. Okay, thanks very much.
All right, thanks, Les. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Okay,
Bye-bye.
bye-bye.
You know, I'm so lucky to have had the time to talk to Les. Hearing about his life experience and service in the Australian Army, not something you hear about often in detail, but I'm sure, as he said, there is a lot more that we may not be privy to, but at least gives you a sense of what it was like. I really felt the Australian spirit with Les and the importance of choosing what is the right thing to do, getting the job done and being your best and genuine, authentic self. It's something that I really admire and what I love about Australia. And as we know, life can be complex and confusing, so hearing such grounded advice and being reminded to stand in your truth and in what is good to do in any given moment. So I hope that leaves you thinking and that you can take it into your journey of life and do what is right for you. I'm Melinda Nassif, and please don't forget to check out more episodes from our elders by visiting www.storiesfromtheelders.com. Stories from the Elders is brought to you by the Northern Beaches Council, and thank you to RSL Care Life for introducing me to Les Hubble. Bye for now.